Something has happened this week that I never thought we would ever see, and that is the fact that Total War and Creative Assembly Sophia released the huge update for Total War Pharaoh, making it the third most played game in the franchise, which is absolute insanity. I made a full video breaking down everything that you could kind of expect with Total War Pharaoh. It added in a ton of new units, it added in 39 new playable factions, a ton of them being major and of course minor factions. Not only that, but it added in the biggest map we've ever seen in a historical Total War, and people are loving it. But it's had such a knock-on effect in the Total War community that I don't think even CA could have expected. When Pharaoh came out, it was a bit of a disaster. The whole lead up to it had been somewhat skepticism after Troy was just not it, being exclusive on the Epic Games Store for the first 12 months and then, well, never really reaching more than a few thousand concurrent players. Pharaoh was even worse. It had possibly the poorest release of any Total War game. Created by Sophia, which was the same company that made Troy, it seemed like these were the guys that made the failed Total War titles. Not only was it a Sagas game that didn't have enough content, completely overcharged, but the content it did have was just not faithful to what the Total War franchise had built up over the years. So when Pharaoh's Dynasty was announced, it was an adrenaline shot in the franchise. Sitting currently at very positive reviews on Steam just a week after its release, it seems that they have managed to redeem themselves. With 90% positive ratings, it is absolute insanity for this game. With only 153 negative reviews over the 1,500 people that have actually left them, which not only for a new Total War game is shocking, but for a Total War Pharaoh's game is even more insanity. Right now, there are 5,812 players playing Total War Pharaoh, with a 24-hour peak of 6,719. Not only that, but it reached an all-time peak of almost 8,000 concurrent players. And that is saying something. Because the original Pharaoh, well, it didn't even come close to that. It has just under 400 people playing it right now, and its all-time peak was 5,400 people. This is a game that didn't exclusively come out on the Epic Games Store, and yet still completely flopped when it came out on Steam. Okay, so they've pretty much made Total War Pharaoh and the original title obsolete. What have they done to Troy? Well, it's kind of the same story, with 238 people playing it as the time I'm recording that, with around the same as their 24-hour peak. It had a peak of 4,700 about 2.5 years ago. That was a year after it came off its exclusivity contract with Epic Games and put onto Steam. But both the games of Pharaoh and Troy have mixed reviews, around 60 to 70% positive, and, well, as far as Steam's aware, that is not all that great. But Dynasties has a different story to it. And why is it? Well, it's because it shows that Creative Assembly have actually done something positive for the community. What they have done is created an expansion, an update that really, financially, they aren't benefiting from, or at least not in the direct way. And it's about this direct financial benefit that I think is the important story for me. You see, everything that Creative Assembly has done in the last half decade has been for direct financial gain, and it's really hurt the community. From the Warhammer DLCs that have been completely overpriced, the Epic Games Store deal with Total War Troy, and the release of Total War Pharaoh, making it a Sagas game at the price of a full Total War game, basically releasing half the content for the exact same price as they would a regular mainline franchise game. All of this has been for a quick buck and for more money. Of course, there was speculation to why, whether it was down to the downfall of their Hyenas franchise that was supposed to be their big new FPS game. I don't know if that's entirely the case, because the Total War franchise has been flailing for quite a while now, being propped up by that fantasy element in Total War Warhammer. So it's great that finally Creative Assembly have released something fantastic. Not only that, but shows a real longevity and a look into the future rather than financial gain at this second in time. Because nobody had to pay for Total War Pharaoh's Dynasties. This was an entirely new game, the biggest historical Total War we've ever had, and the true Bronze Age Total War that everybody wanted within one free package if you already owned Pharaoh, which was a gift to the people that were disappointed from the first game. But not only that, since it pretty much combines Pharaoh and Troy together, it was a gift to the people that were disappointed in the last 5 years of Total War games. for no extra charge. And the talk around that is incredible. As mentioned, this is now the third most played Total War game on Steam. Of course, Warhammer 3 is always going to be at the top. That is just one of the most overwhelmingly successful games. It is huge and once again is the biggest Total War game with Immortal Empires, with the most amount of factions and the most amount of content. Then we've got Three Kingdoms, which is still surprisingly incredibly popular despite its kind of lackluster response at the time. I think it was the last game that did offer something, at least for the historical fans, and still has a ton of content. I particularly enjoyed Three Kingdoms when it first came out. Then we have Total War Pharaoh's Dynasties, snuggling nicely in between Three Kingdoms and Rome 2. And I think that's where it belongs. I was worried that it just wasn't going to hit in the right way, but thankfully they seem to have done that pretty well. It has kept its 24-hour peak of around 5,000 to 6,000 concurrent players, even heading up to 7,000 to 8,000 concurrent players a couple days ago, which, you know, for the original Total War franchise in the mainline games might not seem like much, but it is a start to regain something that Creative Assembly lost a long time ago. And I do think they deserve praise for it. I have seen a lot of people that have said that this is too little too late, that they haven't done anything great here, but they have. And if you take everything that Creative Assembly has done, I think it has been a net positive. Of course, the last 10 years or so has been a bit of a struggle for the franchise, and there's been a lot of frustration towards the player base. But this is the first thing that has blown me out of the water from Creative Assembly for a long time. And I just hope it continues, so it does deserve the praise in hope that they carry on this way. And I hope that CA as an entire company see what Sophia did in their small little offshoot, fixing, creating, and establishing themselves as true Total War developers and a real mainstream powerhouse, and decides to help that, to reinforce that, to give them the resources they need and to praise it. But they could have just run off with the money, and if I'm going to be honest, Creative Assembly as a company would still be fine for years and years to come if they carried on the route they went, because as much as the main core line fans are really angry at the way that the Total War games have been going, they're still making plenty of cash. But they took a year to sit back and work on something for free, which I think does deserve to be praised. But what I think it does do is show that whilst there have been issues within Creative Assembly as a company, that the core developers and the love and the passion for this franchise is still definitely there. It doesn't feel like that's been entirely lost, and I'm so goddamn happy to see that. Looking at the reviews, there is nothing but positivity. Instead of abandoning Pharaoh after a rough release, the dev team took the time to make things right with fans. You love to see it. This update made Pharaoh the best historical Total War. This game made me care about the Bronze Age. My own family pales in comparison to my Dynasty. And you can see here, not only have they combined Troy and Pharaoh together, but they've added in extra things like the whole Dynasty mode, where you have your own family trees, you have your own royal families, and it really creates this cool Game of Thrones-esque style and complete customization of said dynasties as well. This really is how you turn around a game. So, the question is, what does this mean for the future of Total War as a franchise? Well, I think in terms of overall development, it means that there's been a switch in terms of management. Not only did we get the news of an ex-Total War developer stating all the issues with Rome 2, which was kind of where these wobbles started over a decade ago, but it looks like Creative Assembly have tried to fix a lot of the issues that they've caused in the last half decade or so. Focusing on delayed gratification rather than instant reward is a really good step in the right direction. And if we can see this with the other Total War games, I think it's back on the up and up for this RTS franchise. And there are other signs, not just the fact that Pharaoh Dynasties has been months, if not years in development, released for complete free and added more than anyone ever expected, but also the fact that we haven't heard anything about the franchise in a while. Creative Assembly have been quiet and they've just been working on their other games in the background. Okay, Warhammer's had some updates, it's had some more controversial expansions, but Pharaoh has also had updates, and it's had this huge expansion. Since Rome, we straight away got Attila. We straight away got Thrones of Britannia that moved into the Warhammer franchise with Three Kingdoms then coming, then Troy, then Pharaoh, and it seemed like the Total War franchises were all over the place with so many games coming out year after year, but they finally pulled back. There hasn't been any news on what the next Total War games, and normally at this time they'd probably be teasing it, which means that I'm hoping that they're taking a quick step back to reevaluate, readjust, and have a look at the way the company has been working for the last half decade, because that was what was needed. We've seen it so many times in big AAA companies, whether it's Call of Duty, Battlefield, and Creative Assembly need to do the same thing. to realize where they've lost the player base, what bits have worked well and which bits haven't. Because I think people have said it best, that Creative Assembly have been riding off the goodwill from decades ago, rather than the goodwill that they've conjured up in the last few years. Because there isn't all that much. It is still a fantastic franchise with some great legacy games, but currently it is riding on those legacy games. The success of the Warhammer titles are an exception rather than the rule of the franchise, and we want to see those hits, those great, fantastic content-filled games come back to being the staple, rather than being shots in the dark. I think Pharaoh Dynasties is something fantastic and does deserve praise, but that doesn't mean that it's time for Total War and Creative Assembly to rest on their laurels. This is a direction that we need the franchise to continue in. This is the direction that they have to look at and see as being delayed gratification success, rather than their next Saga's title, which doesn't bring the content that people desire. But I would love to know what you think. Do you think I'm being overly fair to Total War Pharaoh's Dynasties? Do you think that this is just a one-off and they won't happen again? Or, like me, do you agree this is a great sign for the franchise in the future? Make sure you leave your opinions down below.